doing that, I was face to face with it. It was holding me by my throat, and it felt like it was sucking something out of me.
I probably should have been more scared than I was when I witnessed the exorcism.
I turned and looked on my right side. When I did, there's a beam on the side of the tree, a large beam. It's looking at me and I'm looking at it.
After I hit the lock button and looked back up, I saw red eyes staring back at me.
That they're going to show multiple gods all over the earth, be able to speak in people's languages, and at that point, it kind of converge into this one entity, which will be revealed as extraterrestrial. You'll realize that aliens are the gods of old, and at that point, it'll wipe religion out of the context of humanity.
No, it couldn't have been a person, I know that. I know that people can't run through the woods like that.
So this thing comes into view, and I see it. It's 50 yards away from me. It's walking on two legs. It's huge. This is a big, hairy-looking being.
Welcome. I'm your host, and this is uNcomfortable. Welcome back, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. I apologize for my voice. I have been a bit under the weather for the past week and a couple of days. This thing just does not seem to want to let go, and it has hit my voice very hard. So, bear with me. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it featured on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. Most importantly, please share the show with others and make sure you leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. Those are the main ways you can help in getting the show out in front of more people. And with that, the more people listening means more great guests coming forward with their experiences, like tonight's guest. Just a heads up to any of you who may be attending this year's Ohio Bigfoot Conference during the weekend of May 6th. Keep an eye out for our booth, as I will be there in support of the show again. Stop by and say hi. Maybe you pick up some merch. Maybe you don't. Just make sure you come over, say hi, let me know where you're from and how you've heard of me. If you haven't already, make sure to pick up the link in our Uncomfortable Discord server. You can find that in the show notes. You've heard me mention this earlier. The Uncomfortable Patreon will be launching next month. Many of you have asked how to help support the show, and Patreon looks like the best way that I can provide you with a way to do that. It will also be the only place that you can find Uncomfortable Afterthoughts, which will be a video companion to the weekly show. An announcement regarding this year's Bigfoot and Brews is not far off. It will again be held at Sister Lakes Brewing Company, most likely September 9th. I think that date is safe to say it is locked in. I'm shoring up a few loose ends and should be making the official announcement shortly. Tickets for this event will go quickly, so please don't hesitate to get yours. Seating will be limited, and we will again be looking forward to having many wonderful vendors and a day filled with awesome speakers. So if you're interested in being a vendor for Bigfoot and Brews, please reach out to me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com, and I will get you information that you need. Tonight's guest is a very well-educated gentleman holding 2 masters. He is an author of Haunting Illinois, Paranormal Illinois, 6 Tales of Terror, Tales of Coles County, and Witchcraft in Illinois. He recently directed a documentary called Tinker's Shadow, The Hidden History of Tinker's Swiss Cottage. He's had several articles appear in publications like Historic Illinois and in the Journal of Illinois State Historical Society. He's also published several short stories appearing in various anthologies. His short story Co-Ed Terror and the Ivory Tower of Doom was adapted into a short film in 2011, which won Best Actor in the Chicago Horror Film Festival. His latest effort is Secret Virginia, a multifaceted exploration of Virginia folklore and ghost stories. So, if you're ready, let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Mr. Michael Kleen. Michael, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate being here with us, sir. Interestingly enough, Michael comes to me as a suggestion by way of a previous guest and a longtime listener of the show. So long, in fact, that she had left me one of my very first reviews on Apple Podcast. It's a long story. If you've been following the show for the last 2 years, you probably know the story behind that. But I do owe tonight's guest the chance to get to talk with him. I owe that to Miss Emily. So, Emily, thank you for that. Michael, God, man, you've got quite the resume. Author of a number of books. I saw the Tales of H.P. Lovecraft thrown in there. There's a lot of really interesting stuff. But you primarily write about the legends, lore, paranormal stuff of throughout Illinois and now Virginia.
Yeah, that's right. I moved to Virginia several years ago and sort of took my interest in folklore and ghost stories and decided to start something new here in Virginia. So I created, it's called Secret Virginia. It's kind of an experiment for me. It's mainly on social media, Instagram, Facebook. I post a lot of photography. We go around visiting haunted places, mysterious places, and I take photos of them and post them on Instagram. Do a limited podcast in the fall where we just do a run of about 9 episodes on different haunted places around Virginia.
Oh, very interesting. What's the name of that?
It's called Secret Virginia.
Okay.
And yeah, you can find it on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all over the place, iTunes, that kind of thing. But before that, I did a lot of work in Illinois. I'm from Illinois originally. And in my younger days, back in my early 20s, I was quite well known for writing about the legends and lore of Illinois. I had a small publishing business where I published books about ghost lore and paranormal stuff around the Midwest. Not just my own books, but some others as well. And that kind of, I joined the Army in my early 30s and left Illinois, went to New York. I was stationed there for a number of years. So that interest kind of fell by the wayside. Although I did visit and write about some New York haunts on my website. But yeah, I used to do a lot of paranormal conferences. I used to do a lot of speaking engagements. I'd write about Illinois history. And that was my main focus when it came to ghost stories and things like that, is the history behind the stories. Because when I first started writing about it, I was going to Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, and that's home of one of the most famous ghost stories in Illinois, which would be Mary Hawkins at Pemberton Hall. And a lot of people had heard of that story, but there wasn't a whole lot of background research done on it. And that was one of the things that I did, was go through the newspaper archive, try to dig up information on where this story might have started. There were several authors that had just, they'd picked up on these details that had changed over the years, and it just didn't really match up with what the historical reality would have been. There's another place in Coles County called Ashmore Estates, which you may have heard of. It's been on numerous ghost shows.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar.
Yeah, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures. I actually appeared on the Ghost Adventures episode on Ashmore Estates, talking about the history of the building.
Oh, did you really?
But that's another one that I took. I took a place that was in the local imagination, but nobody really knew much about its history, and I dug all that stuff up and wrote about it extensively. So that kind of is where I got my start in that area. That's around East Central Illinois. But I've been interested in this subject pretty much my entire life.
Let me jump in here real quick. Having been on an episode of Ghost Adventures, there's not to dig up any dirt or anything, but it's funny that you bring that up, because recently in the past 2 weeks there has been a lot of stuff coming out about Zach Baggins, and
yes,
I'm just curious. A long time ago, I was reached out to by Keith Linder, and Keith was in an episode. I think they lived in Oregon. They were having all kinds of, I think, like there were burn marks on the crucifixes in their house. There was a Bible that caught on fire. I think they were out in Oregon. And it's one of the only episodes that Ghost Adventures, at the end of the episode, said they had no evidence. And Keith and his wife at the time, I don't know if they're still together or not, but I know they took a lot of guff. They received a lot of hate for, people making the assumption that they were hoaxing everything. And he had another group come out, two other groups come out within a year of Ghost Adventures being there. And each one, so Ghost Adventures spent a day and a half investigating their home. And the other two teams, the one team came and lived in the house for 3 weeks, I believe, and the other team came in and lived in the house for 2.5 weeks. And both of those teams produced what they said was a pretty inordinate amount of evidence that they were having poltergeist activity and things were going on in the house. All that to say, that's back in the news again, and there's a bunch of stuff going on with previous people that Zach had worked with. What was your experience with that crew when you did that episode? I mean, was it was there, anytime you have people in the business of production, they always are looking for something that's going to get somebody to come back after commercial and make you want to come back next week. If you don't mind, just tell me, how was your experience with that?
I'd be happy to, and I've got quite the story for you, actually.
Okay.
So I don't really talk a lot about my experience because it was very limited to begin with. I was only on there for like 15 seconds or something like that, but they are big on demonic activity in that show.
Yeah.
And they were trying to come out like there's all this demonic activity at Ashmore Estates, which I guess I should give you some background on what that place was. Originally, it was the county poor farm. Every county had like a poor farm where indigent people would live, people that had no means of support or alcoholics, they would be sentenced to live on the farm. This was before the modern welfare state. And they would live there and work there. So what became Ashmore Estates was the almshouse on the poor farm. And during the early 19th century, early 20th century rather, it was bought and became I hesitate to call it a hospital, but it housed people with developmental disabilities and things like that. It did have some overflow for psychiatric patients, so there were some people there that were violent. I interviewed a local psychologist who actually told me that when he worked there in the 80s, there was a patient who he described as possessed, who had almost superhuman strength that broke her restraints and attacked him. But that was few and far between. So then the place closed down in the late 1980s, and it sat abandoned for many years. And so naturally, kids from the local college, the university where I attended, they would go out there and explore the place. I mean, they basically just left everything in there, all the files and all the furniture and everything. And so kids would go in there and scare themselves and tell stories about the place. And that's when I found it, when I first visited there and was told about it, that's what it was. It was just this abandoned building out in the middle of nowhere, and no one knew anything about it. The locals did, but they didn't really talk about it. So I did a lot of research on it and found out what it had been used for and all of that. So, I mean, this is just my personal experience, but I had been in there probably a dozen times when it was abandoned, when finally it was bought by a man named Scott Kelly, who owned it when they did the show. He played a character. They turned it into a haunted house, and he played a character of a guy, kind of an undertaker with a top hat and stuff. And you see that in the episode, and he's really hamming it up, just trying to make it like an interesting experience.
Yeah.
But Zach really tried to claim that there was some type of demonic activity there, and I never felt threatened while I was there. I never felt like anything evil was there. Nothing like that. So I think a lot of that was just trying to make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
They interviewed a local weatherman who they made it in the show sound like he had been attacked by some type of entity. And I talked to Scott later about it, and he was there when this allegedly happened, and the guy just had a seizure, that's all. And the ambulance came and got him, and that was it. He doesn't really think he was attacked by anything. So there's definitely a lot of theater involved.
Sure.
That's all. That's what I can say about that.
Well, and like the first few seasons, and I'm guilty of still watching the show. It's great entertainment. But the first couple of seasons, I was really pretty impressed with it. And it wasn't all everything was a demon. This is a portal to hell. It seemed like some pretty legitimate ghost hunting that was going on. But at some point, a couple of seasons in, they started, I'm sure, recognizing that some of the episodes that they had that seemed to have some kind of an evil overtone to it probably performed much better than just the regular stuff. And man, they latched onto that, and everything's a demon now. And it's remarkable how many paranormal investigators I've talked to who are all of almost, I mean, there might be one or two, but the rest of them are all like, I've been doing this for 19 years. I've never once felt like I was in the presence of something evil. yeah, there might be something that's a little ticked off, or a little feels like kind of playing with you and being a little bit of a trickster. But demonic, evil, no. So
yeah, I mean, if you really want to stare into evil, go to a prison ward with psychopaths and people like that. That's my personal opinion. I'm not saying that evil, demons don't exist in the supernatural sense, but there is evil in the world, but it's in the form of humans, Yeah. Like, I don't think that you're just going to find a demon hanging out in an old building somewhere.
Maybe an old abandoned prison.
Yeah, possibly.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I might buy into that one, or at least some very negative spirits, some negative entities, if there's some carryover from the people that were locked up there. Well, that's interesting. I appreciate your candor about that. It does seem to seem to track properly with a lot of the things that I've heard from other people, and especially some of the stuff that's coming out now, which, I'm going to continue to watch the show because it's good entertainment, and everybody likes a little tense and scary, oh my God, what if that was real? But it's a shame that, and I find this with, paranormal investigators. I find it with Bigfoot researchers. It seems like no matter what the subject, you have these differing camps that just seem to have to butt heads with everyone around them, and I don't understand why that is.
Controversy sells, and some of it, I saw a video criticizing Zach because at his museum, they say, well, he doesn't own all the objects there. He actually leases some of them. Yeah. Well, so what? Like, why is that? Yeah. Why is that negative?
My daughter and her boyfriend, they just went there 2 months ago. They took a trip out there, and that was one of their stops. They were like, "There's no way we're going to be out here and not go to that."
Sure.
And they said it was absolutely great. They said they had an absolute ball. It was not a money grab. It was very long. You got to spend an awful lot of time in there, and they said it was extremely well done, and they had an absolute ball there. So, it is what it is, and there's always got to be somebody on the top, and there's got to be people always trying to climb up the sides and trying to get to the top themselves. So,
yeah.
The one thing I do have to say, though, in podcasting, so far, my experience over a little over 2 years of having this show, I have not run into that among podcasters. Now, that being said, I do try extremely hard to make sure that the people I surround myself with, that I would call friends or good acquaintances or people that I would go out on a limb for, are all good people. So I don't know. I'm sure there are some bad ones out there. I don't know who they would be, but so far my experience in this line of work has been very good. So that is that's a blessing. So while we're in Illinois, there is a reputedly haunted cemetery there, Bachelor's Grove.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned before we started recording that you'd been there several times. What have you garnered from your experiences there?
Well, talk about drama. I mean, if you want to get into paranormal drama, just mention Bachelor's Grove. But
and why is that?
It's probably the most famous haunted place in the world, I would say. I mean, it's among It's definitely among the most well-known in the world.
Right.
And there were a small handful of paranormal researchers in Chicago who tried to lay claim to it.
Oh.
And that caused a lot of consternation. So it's owned by the Forest Preserve and the Park District. And so they tried to, let's just say, yeah, I think laid claim is a good way of putting it, where they would try to claim some exclusive rights to it. They would hold events there, and it just got to be one of these things where everybody was trying to like sabotage everybody else to keep people away from it, away from quote unquote their site that they had. And I never really got involved in that because I'm just a writer. I kind of do things on my own, and that was one of the first haunted places that I ever tried to visit back when I was in high school, because I grew up in the northwestern suburbs of Chicago, and everybody's heard of Bachelor's Grove. So as soon as I learned to drive, I would go down there and try to find it. And back then, there was really very limited internet, and what was on the internet wasn't all that great. It had been written about in a couple books, and it was right at the time when people started to do real research, because the authors who had written about it at the time, it was clear that they hadn't spent a lot of time exploring that area, because just to give you an example, there were always rumors of a phantom house, and people would talk about seeing this phantom farmhouse at various places, and it would kind of move around. And several authors said, there's no evidence that a house ever existed there. Well, if you actually go there and walk along the trail leading to the cemetery used to be a road. And that's sort of how it got started, is that kids would go and drive there and drink and make out, and they would tell stories, and the hook hand story and everything like that. That's how it got famous to begin with. But if you walk off the trail several feet, well, there's a house foundation there, and there's an old well and broken pottery, and there's all kinds of evidence that a house was around. So after people started getting a little bit more sophisticated, that information came out online. I remember one website, bachelorsgrove.com. I'm not sure it's even up anymore, but that guy did a lot of research on it and brought that information to the internet. But he later got embroiled in this drama too, and that kind of imploded a lot of people's careers, I would say. But that was a long time ago. I mean, that was like maybe 15 years ago that all happened. So I'm not sure today what's going on over there. You mentioned that there was a fence, and there was a fence there, but every time that I visited, the gate had been knocked over. The gate was removed, so they probably fenced it off. I'm sure they only allow people in there during certain times, because you're technically not even supposed to go in there, because it's the Forest Preserve property.
Yeah.
And they maintain it and everything. Although I know it is a law in Illinois that if you have relatives buried at a cemetery,
You have to be allowed access.
You have to be allowed access. So I never saw anything unusual there personally, but a lot of times we would go during the day. There's a famous photograph of a woman sitting on a headstone that was taken in infrared. You may have seen it, but it's controversial. I personally think it's a fake. because you can see a shadow under her, but other people have tried to explain that away. So yeah, I mean, that's what I know about it pretty much.
Do you think it could become that popular and that revered without there being something to it?
No, I think there's something to it. People, basically any type of ghostly phenomenon that you can think of has been reported there.
Yeah.
From phantom houses, apparitions, ghost lights. There's supposedly a phantom of somebody with a plow that got pulled into the lagoon there. There's like noises people hear. There's lights in the woods. Anything like that. I mean, it's hard for so many people to just make up sightings like that. You know what I mean? Like, I know some of it is probably just repeating what they've heard elsewhere, but when you have so many different eyewitnesses that come forward, I believe Dale Kazmarek, who's a local paranormal investigator, he's been doing it for decades. He documented all the different sightings of this phantom house over the years, and it's a lot of people that have seen it. So there must be something going on there.
Yeah. Isn't that strange that the house would appear in various different locations throughout there? You know, you would think if something was going to phantom materialize, you would think that it would be on the base of its original foundation. It's just strange.
There was at least 2 houses there.
Were there?
So it could have been more than one. I personally have seen 2 wells out there. There may be a third that I've seen pictures of. So there probably, I mean, there is evidence that there were multiple structures in the woods there at one time. So,
like, at this time, it's early in your career. You're still a relatively young man. At any point, did you ever get the bug to start researching the paranormal, or has documenting that always just been your forte?
Well, that's a good question. Have you ever read the book The Last Laugh by Raymond Moody?
No, I haven't.
So, Dr. Raymond Moody was the doctor who originally publicized near-death experiences, and he wrote a bunch of very famous books. One of them was called Life After Life, and The Last Laugh was his final book that he put out, and it lays out a whole philosophy of the paranormal that I've kind of adhered to my whole life. And that is basically that there's always been this back and forth between 3 groups of people: skeptics, religious fundamentalists, and people trying to prove that the paranormal is real. And they go round and round with each other. They do the talk show circuit and argue about the issue. But he kind of put out a 4th way of seeing things, which is, he called it playful paranormalism, where the goal is to have fun with it and just sort of explore it for what it is in art, in literature, you know, film, culture, stories. And that's the way that I've always approached it. So I've never really been interested in doing scientific research of the paranormal. To me, like, I'd be very sad if we did all this research and found out that the paranormal just doesn't exist and there's nothing to it, you know.
Yeah.
To me, that would just sort of undermine my entire life, my entire interest in this subject. So I'm more into
you enjoy it for
studying
what it is.
Right, yeah. I don't want to prove or disprove it. I enjoy reading about it, learning, and all those different cultural aspects.
So what are some of the other more, I don't know that it would necessarily be recognizable to people, but some of the more impactful stories that you've heard from the area?
From Illinois or Virginia?
Yeah.
So from Illinois, I would have to say that the most impactful for me probably has been the stories around Coles County, where I went to college. And I guess I could say that in all my years of researching that area, even though I live in another state, I'm still like obsessed with it and try to get out there as much as I can. They have, per capita, they have to have the most ghost stories of anywhere. Chicago has a lot of them, but it's a big city, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, Coles County, we're talking about a population of maybe at most 40,000 people, and 10,000 of which are college students. I've documented at least a dozen or more haunted places and ghost stories from that area. And it is interesting to me to find out whether that particular place is just so unique, or maybe every county has that many stories, but just nobody's ever bothered to look into it before.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you, to kind of piggyback on what you just said. I guess what is the fervor of the community as far as that goes? Does that community kind of revel in the fact that, are they behind it? There was a very close to me, Dowagiac, Michigan, back in 1964. There was a sighting of a tall, hairy creature that ended up becoming known as the Dewey Lake Monster. By all accounts, it was a description of a Bigfoot. And the community, till this day, the community is, it's a small rental, several little lakes in a very small area. They're reliant on people coming and renting cottages through the summer and stuff like that. But, over 57, 58 years, 59 years, whatever it has been, the community is just 100% still behind keeping the information at hand. And, local businesses all have, their trinkets and their toys and stuff like that it just keeps it going. So I wonder, like in that area that you're talking about, does the community do they revel in the fact that they're known?
Short answer is no.
Really?
They do not. So I've dealt with some pushback from my research, but I also have many contacts in the community who I still talk to, who tell me about certain things over the years. There's a couple of famous sites there. Of course, the Pemberton Hall, the Legend of Mary Hawkins is the big one. Ashmore Estates is big. The Mad Gasser Mattoon, a lot of people have heard about that. But then there's also some lesser-known ones. There's Ragdoll Cemetery. There's St. Omer Cemetery, where a witch is supposedly buried. And there's been numerous attempts over the years for people to come in and do documentaries or do episodes on different places, and they've been flat out told no, that the cemetery trustees don't want anybody in there, don't want people sniffing around.
Yeah.
And for some pretty good reasons, because in the past, people have vandalized those places. Some of the things are kind of unsavory. There's Airtight Bridge in Coles County where there's a famous unsolved murder where a woman's dismembered torso was found near the bridge in 1980, and that murder went unsolved until I want to say 2014. So it was unsolved for about 25 years. And a community like that, they don't want that to be everything that people think of when they think of Coles County, these negative events. So I can kind of understand that, but there's a religious component to it too. I mean, there's a lot of very, very strongly religious people there that don't like talking about that subject. There is a lot of pushback, I think, in the community. But then there's people that really enjoy it, and people who love visiting the places and will tell me stories. And the book that I wrote about it, Tales of Coles County, has sold pretty well. So there is some interest in it.
It's interesting that you bring that up as far as, like people going in and doing things to the property, because just north of me, probably less than a 10-minute drive, there is a fairly sizable cemetery for a town that's just up over the state line in Michigan. And I had lived there for some years when I was married and had kids. My kids went to school up there. And when I was a younger man, I knew a group of kids who hung out in Niles, and we'd go on a Friday night or Saturday night. We'd get our cars washed up and waxed up, and we'd roll our windows down and start playing music really loud, and just drive, just go cruising. And back at that time, there were you didn't have to go very far to hear about the stories of a witch that was buried in that cemetery. And it's unfortunate. I understand the interest in it, but there were a lot of people went in there and basically desecrated ground, thinking that they had found the resting place of this supposed witch, and turned over tombstones. They spray painted mausoleums and all that stuff. So I certainly understand a small community not wanting that to be what they're known for.
So folklorists actually have a name for that, and I'm trying to find it right now. It's been a while since I last referenced it, but the idea of it is basically that people who go to these legend sites, it's called legend tripping, sometimes it results in a frenzy of destructive activity. And unfortunately, that's something that you've seen there. That's something they've seen in Coles County. Yeah, I wish I could find that term for you, because it's not something that most people have probably ever heard of.
Yeah, I wouldn't even begin to know what that was.
I'll come back to it if I can find it. Let's move on.
All right. So where do we go from here? Are we still in Illinois, or have you started to make your way across the U.S. to the more eastern side?
Yeah, I've been in Virginia now for about 4 years. And so I started Secret Virginia to kind of continue my work, continue my research, and sort of look at it from a number of different angles, like photography, for example, videography on YouTube, podcast. I don't do the podcast myself. I write the script, and I hired a voice actor to portray this character that I created, Morella Bell, who's this sort of ambiguously aged Southern belle that, you're not quite sure how long she's been around or if she's even still alive or not, but she kind of tells the stories of the locations. And I do some fictional stories. I've published a couple of kind of ghost stories set in Virginia on YouTube and stuff like that. So it's kind of an interesting way to look at all of these places.
Very interesting. That's a unique take on it. I like it.
Yeah, Virginia has, of course, it's been around for a long time. It's one of the oldest states in the country. So it has a lot of ghost stories, but there isn't a big community here like there is elsewhere. At least not that I found. In Illinois, 15 years ago, there were dozens of groups, paranormal groups. They would have conferences. And I just don't really see that around here, which is kind of interesting. It must be like a cultural thing.
So you bring up Virginia, and with Virginia, that puts you relatively close to a specific mountain range that runs through that part of the country, the Appalachians. And with the advent of TV series like Hellier and Dark Holler and the Appalachians have gotten a new modern reputation for being paranormal, creepy, a lot of weird stuff going on there. I've talked to people that say in certain areas along that range that the old gods, little g gods like Pan and Lilith and some of the other less desirable entities are still pretty ingrained into the people that live there. Now, I don't know if that's true or if that is designed to elicit a specific response from people in these shows. What have you found about being in that area? Is there like some darkness, some weirdness that goes on in the Appalachians?
I think there is. Let me take a moment here because I found the term.
Oh, did you?
It's ostensive frenzy. So, ostension is the acting out of a legend at a site. So when people go and visit the witches' graves, there'll be some ritual or leaving a coin or something like that. But ostensive frenzy is the phrase for when people become destructive and vandalize the location and stuff like that. So to answer your question, Appalachia is predominantly settled by the descendants of the Scots-Irish people.
Right.
And when I was doing my research for one of my recent books, Witchcraft in Illinois, which kind of traces the history, it's a cultural history of witchcraft practices in Illinois. And what I found was that the Scots-Irish people that settled in the Appalachian area, and a lot of them came over in the early days of Illinois settlement. A lot of them came out to the prairie, but they were, I would say, the largest group to have beliefs about witchcraft. A lot of the other groups, when you think of like what's the famous cases of witchcraft in the United States, it's Salem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the New Englanders in the 1800s, they had abandoned their beliefs in witchcraft. But the people who settled in the Appalachian wilderness, they were very superstitious, and they never gave up those beliefs. And they had a tradition of what are called witch masters, which were kind of like early doctors, but they also combated curses and hexes and things like that.
Really?
So that whole region is just replete with tales like that, and it's kind of a wild wilderness as it is, you know, so it excites the imagination. So I would say you have these old communities there that have been there for generations, plenty of time for local legends to be developed. So yeah, I'm not surprised that area has that reputation.
So what are some of the more well-known haunts or legends in the Virginia area?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Bunnyman Bridge. That's a Northern Virginia legend in Fairfax County. And it really, I think it's become so well known just because it's unusual. And there's even a Bunnyman Brewery where they have branded it and sell like their own brands of beer and stuff. Mm-hmm. So people have fun with it, but it's also based on a real event. So,
oh, really?
The bridge is kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and it's one of these places where people would drive their car out to at night, and they would see if they can walk from one end of the bridge to the other. It's a tunnel bridge, so it's like a cement bridge that you would drive through, and there's an old railroad track above it, but I don't think that a train runs on there anymore. And it's out in the middle of nowhere on this like dead-end road. So, of course, it's like the perfect place for people to go and scare themselves. And so it's become hugely popular, but a lot of people don't know that it was based on a real event. I believe it was in 1970 in October. There were a couple of people, not even near the bridge. It was, they were parked on a road nearby, and some guy who was wearing a bunny costume or bunny ears or something like that, he attacked their car with a hatchet, and he actually threw the hatchet and it busted into their windshield. And the hatchet is on display. If you go to Wikipedia, you can see a picture of it. But you can also go and look in like newspapers.com and read all the original articles about the event. So it was just weird. And then that blew up, and all over that area, Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland, people were seeing this bunny man that year. And it became like, it just kind of blew up and got out of control. And that story took on a life of its own, and just now there's a supposedly an insane asylum involved. You know, the guy was escaped inmate from the asylum, and the bus that he was on crashed by the bridge, and he murdered all the people on the bus, and just all kinds of like crazy stories like that.
Where did he get the bunny costume?
Yeah, I have no idea like why that original person decided to wear that. The first time I heard of this legend was on one of the earliest kind of paranormal reality TV. I think it was called Destination Fear or something like that, where it was on MTV.
It was Fear,
something like that. Yeah. And they would have like college kids go out there and they, see how scared they got.
How crazy that you would bring that up, because just last weekend, I went out with my daughter and her boyfriend. They were in town, and we started talking about it on the way back to the house. And, they were both just little kids when it came out. So, obviously they weren't watching it at the time. But when we got back to the house, I was actually able to find 3 or 4 episodes of it on YouTube. And yeah, it was one of the first ones. It was actually it was probably one of the best programs that was ever on MTV before they started with the Jersey Shore and all the other goofy shows that they had. But yeah, I knew it sounded familiar, and now that you bring that up, it's like that's got to be where I heard of it, because I can't really think of ever coming across it reading about anything. But that's crazy.
Yeah, and it's just so unusual, it just kind of stands out in your mind.
So in your research, as far as, putting this down on paper, were you able to come up with, like some of the truths of, did a guy escape from a prison or a insane asylum, or?
No, the asylum that they're referring to in the story wasn't even built at the time, and the bridge was built after the event supposedly took place. So there's just the legend part of it is just filled with the details that don't add up, that have no historical basis.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm glad that nobody was killed and butchered by the bunny man, but that is kind of a bummer. I was hoping that there would be something to that.
Although there was, unfortunately, somebody who was murdered in the woods there, which is sort of a weird aspect to a lot of these places I found in Virginia. The haunted bridges. There's one Crawford Road Bridge that's out by Colonial Williamsburg. And there were actually 3 murders in the woods nearby. There's another cemetery that's close to where I live that supposedly there's like a witch buried there. It's one of these witches' graves, and there's a pond, but they found a dead body there too. So there's this weird association around here with real life horrible events and these sort of legendary places.
Isn't that strange? Sometimes I wonder, are some of these people that are prone to doing dastardly things like, committing a murder, are they influenced, or not necessarily? I'm not saying that the legends have created their actions. That's not what I'm getting at. But, is it so ingrained in the local community that, does that pop into somebody's head? Well, I'm just going to dump the body out by the bridge because that's haunted anyway,
Yeah.
So
it has a reputation of being a bad place, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And it could just be that these places are all in isolated locations where a murderer might find it convenient or maybe they're drawn to it somehow because of the reputation. It's like a chicken and the egg type of situation.
Yeah. Are there any, like in Virginia, the area you're in now, are there any areas that a plethora for stories that would make you kind of associate it with the town that you went to school in. A number of different things going on. They can't all not be true.
I would have to say Colonial Williamsburg. I think that really captures people's imagination because it's a living history museum, but it's also a real town, and there's a university there. So it is a place where people live and experience things day to day. But in the old town, the old part of Williamsburg, where they've tried to like preserve what it looked like in the colonial days, pretty much every building there is supposed to be haunted. They have like 3 or 4 different ghost tours. Whole books have been written about it. Pretty good books, actually, that I haven't owned some of them. But, yeah, I mean, pretty much any building there is haunted. There's the Peyton Randolph house is pretty well known. Peyton Randolph was one of the founding fathers who actually, if you count the presidents of the Continental Congress as our presidents, he was actually one of the first presidents of the colonial government, or whatever you want to call it.
Interesting.
So even before George Washington, but he died before we won our independence. So pretty much nobody's ever heard of him, even though he was like this really prominent figure in the Revolutionary Circle. But his house is supposed to be extremely haunted. And a lot of the structures, some of them are original, some of them are partially original, and some are reconstructions. But even the reconstructions are supposed to be haunted. So go figure. I'm not sure how that works, but maybe the ghosts were drawn back to them because it looked familiar. But it's a beautiful little town with like cobblestone sidewalks and yeah, I mean, per capita, it's got to have the most ghost stories, I think, of anywhere in Virginia.
In any of your works, have you put together anything that would be like a semblance of a guide for people, if they were interested in looking into some haunted history while they were on vacation, or, deciding to plan a trip and were looking into paranormal type stuff? Do you have a roadmap of sorts that would help people with making decisions?
Not yet. I'm currently compiling information to do something like that. I had a book on Illinois called Haunting Illinois, and it was exactly that. It was like a county by county, city by city guide to like pretty much every haunted place that I collected over the years. And I'd like to do something like that about Virginia. And I've got a database going of, I think it's over 300 places right now.
Wow.
that are supposed to be haunted. And those are all like legitimate in a sense that they've all been written about in a book. So I'm sure there's more out there too. I haven't even scratched the surface of combing through all the different books and everything that have been written about Virginia. So eventually I'm planning on probably publishing a book like that, like a guide to all these places, their address. The problem is in Virginia, a lot of them are privately owned. So I'm a little leery about that. In my book on Illinois, only a few were like private residences, but in Virginia, a lot of the haunted places are private homes. Or they're like historic homes and plantation homes that are just privately owned, and they probably wouldn't appreciate a bunch of people showing up at their door,
Yeah.
So I'm not sure about the legality of all that, or how I want to approach that yet, but there might be something in the pipelines in the future.
Out of everything that you've researched, out of all the stories that you've collected, what's the one that you think has the most credibility behind it as being something's actually going on there?
Wow, that's quite a question. I would have to say, and of course, the more I think about it, probably I would think of other things, but in Chicago, there's the Ghost of Resurrection Mary. It's a very famous story. It was on Unsolved Mysteries. And that's been researched for years and years and years. It's a hitchhiking ghost. So a lot of elements of the story are urban legends or folklore that have been picked up and transmitted around the United States. Like, I'm sure you've heard a similar story of a guy who picks up a hitchhiker and drops her off somewhere and like leaves something in the car. So he returns the next day and an old lady answers the door, and when he describes the girl to her, she says, "Oh, that's my daughter, but she died, 2 years ago," or something like that. That's all in the story too, baked in there. But around like a kernel of truth, if you will, surrounded by all that folklore that's been retold and retold and retold over the years, I think that there is something going on, because her ghost has been reported by dozens of people for decades, like since the 1930s. People have been talking about this.
Oh, wow.
So when we talked about earlier, where you have multiple eyewitnesses over the years reporting basically the same thing, they all pretty much describe like a young blonde woman wearing similar outfit. The details change, but the core of it is pretty similar. I think it's hard to discount that.
I agree. I find that, my show, I cover anything that's fringe topics. 40. So, with Bigfoot, is Bigfoot hard to wrap your head around? Yeah, kind of. But the vast number of sightings and reports that have been, handed into a number of different collection agencies that deal with reports of Bigfoot sightings, they can't all be fake. They can't. And I think when you have a haunted location, and it spans decades of reports, I think you have to lend some credence to that.
Yeah, well, there's two points. There was a talk show host that said something about Bigfoot that kind of resonated with me. I'm not big into Bigfoot, I'm more into like the paranormal stuff.
Sure.
But he brought up the fact that North America is the only continent in the world that doesn't have a great ape, and how weird that is. So maybe there is one that people are seeing, but it's just very reclusive. The other point would be that one of the things that I did study in Illinois are mountain lions, or panthers. They call them panthers. For years, people had stories of panther sightings in rural areas of Illinois. Well, the Department of Natural Resources, they claimed that that doesn't exist.
Right.
For decades, they said panthers are extinct in this part of the country. There's no way that anybody's seeing them. It was this wild legend, this myth that people were talking about, until people started putting up door cams and trail cams everywhere. Yep. And suddenly you actually got videos of panthers roaming around Illinois.
Yep.
Or people would shoot them. And, you know, I've actually seen pictures of people who had shot a panther and it was in the bed of their truck. So it became impossible to deny after a while. Of course, Bigfoot's kind of different because nobody's ever photographed a corpse that was turned out to be legitimate, but
none that has ever made it to the light of day anyway.
Right. So who knows? You know, maybe all these stories over the years, eventually they'll be proven legitimate.
Well, you know, and not to get off topic, but when you go and you look at the vast number of Native Americans, First Nations tribes that all have references to these things in their lore, in their, you know, it transcends modern day 1960, 1958, 57, 58, 59, 60, when Jerry Crew and then the Gimlin, Patterson-Gimlin film came in 67, I think it was, off the top of my head. But, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years that these oral traditions of these things have permeated First Nations tribes. Yeah, to me that is that's something that I pay a lot of attention to, the First Nation stories, and I firmly believe that I think they're there. I think they are. And I used to say that before I died, I hope that they prove that UFOs are real. Well, according to our government, they've now done that. So I guess I'll move on and say that I hope, because I'm already a firm believer in ghosts and paranormal stuff, because I had experience with my my dad after he had passed away. So that's sealed. That's a done deal for me. I don't have to be convinced of that. But now I think I'm going to switch and say, before I die, I hope they have a body. I hope there is a super clear, non-blurry image that is irrefutable that these things do exist, because I believe they do. So, Michael, I want to thank you so much for taking your evening and spending it with me. It's been an enjoyable conversation. I know you got a lot of things in your repertoire as far as content that's available. If you would, please just kind of run through the names of your books and where they're available, where they can get them, whether or not you have a website. You tell people where to find you on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff.
Sure. You can go on my website, michaelkleen.com. It's Kleen. And all my books are listed on there. My books most of them are on Amazon. Witchcraft in Illinois was my latest. It came out in 2017. Tales of Coles County, if you want to read about all the weird and wild stuff going on in Coles County. And Secret Virginia is my newest project. So any, like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, everywhere, Secret Virginia, that's the handle that I go by on everything now. So that's where most of my work is. And I really appreciate you having me on. It's been a while since I've been able to really talk about this stuff with somebody. So I appreciate it.
Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun talking to you, and I'm interested in what you got coming up next. Do me a favor, work on that roadmap, because within a couple of years here, I think I'm going to have some free time on my hands that I'm going to want to go check out all these haunted places and look at the legends and lore of these areas. So,
yeah, that would be great. I'll definitely keep you up to speed.
All right, sir. Once again, Michael Kleen. Go check out his website. Pick up a couple of his books. It's been a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night. Well, that's it for tonight's show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Michael, Mr. Kleen, Kleen. Show this guy some love. Head over to his website, michaelkleen.com. Again, that's Kleen. Check out his efforts. He's got several books. There's a lot of information over there. Again, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. If you have a story or an experience that you would like to have aired on the show, please get a hold of me at contact@uncomfortable@gmail.com. Even if you don't want to be on the show, if you want to share a story and have it read on the show by me, you can do that as well. Make sure to share the show in any way you can. That's what grows a podcast like this. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with coworkers. That's the main thing you can do to help continue to grow this show and get it out in front of more people. Thank you for joining me. I will see you next week, hopefully with a more stable voice. As always, my friends, stay uncomfortable.